Welcome and good afternoon. We appreciate your virtual attendance at our first ever virtual annual meeting. My name is Bob Floyd, Mayor of the Village of Cedar Rock and Board Chair for the Western Piedmont Council of Governments. The year 2020 was a difficult and challenging year for our region and its communities. The economy experienced a severe decline for our 373,000 residents due to the global pandemic. The COVID-19 pandemic was the most significant public health crisis in a century and impacted so many of our residents' lives and challenged our local governments to address new problems. Despite the pandemic challenges, many of our local governments continue to make substantial investments to improve our residents' lives and enhance our appeal for economic opportunities. Sound leadership at the local and regional level has never been more evident. Since 1968, our local governments continue to ask the Western Piedmont Council of Governments to serve as a mechanism to share expertise and resources between our communities. That collaboration allows us to reach new levels of achievement that benefit our residents and businesses. This year, the COG provided even greater support for our local governments. The challenge of economic recovery and moving our communities ahead are common, and we can better address our needs with the assistance of the Western Piedmont Council of Governments. The COG is the common thread that ties us together and allows us to develop and maintain relationships to better serve our constituents. Within the annual report, available on our event dashboard, you will find some of the work and successes in 2020 that demonstrate the value of your council. Our local government's leadership, vision, and engagement built one of the strongest councils of government in North Carolina and the nation. Organizations from across the nation look to us to see how regionalism is best practiced. Count on the Western Piedmont Council of Governments to serve your needs. Let us count on each other to succeed on behalf of our residents and businesses. Now let me introduce Jill Patton, City of Hickory Council Member and Vice Chair of the Western Piedmont Council of Governments.
Thank you, Chair. My name is Jill Patton, City Council Member for the City of Hickory and Vice Chair of the COG Board. In addition to Chair Floyd and I, the executive leadership of the Western Piedmont Council of Governments Board is made up of exceptional elected officials from across the region. At this time, it is my privilege to introduce the other members of our executive committee. Our secretary is Johnny Berry, the mayor of the town of Conley Springs. Our treasurer is George Holloman, the mayor of the town of Taylorsville. Our past chair, Barbara Purnell, is council member for the town of Gamewell. And our members at large are Kitty Barnes, Catawba County Commission and former COG chair, Wayne Abley, Burke County Commissioner and former COG chair, Chip Black, Valdez Mayor and former COG chair, Joseph Gibbons, the mayor for the city of Lenoir. We appreciate their time and of all 35 members of our board and their willingness to serve. I assure you that this group works diligently looking out for your best interest and the interest of our region as a whole. Now for the introduction of our special event sponsors. Without the partnership of our event sponsors, the COG annual meeting nor the upcoming training event titled 13 Ways to Kill Your Community wouldn't be possible. For a full list of our event sponsors, please refer to our virtual event dashboard where you'll find links via the sponsor's logo to each sponsor's websites. All sponsors, including bronze level sponsors, are listed there for your review. Thank you to our bronze level sponsors. Our silver level sponsors include the following organizations: Blue Ridge Energy, Innovative Inc., and Klingspor. Now for our platinum level, our sponsors are Duke Energy, Google, McGill Associates, and Republic Services. Your generous support enables the COG to have this event at no cost to local governments, and we thank you. Let's give our sponsors a virtual round of applause. I would like to turn the program over now to Western Piedmont Council of Governments Executive Director Anthony Starr for a special presentation.
Thank you, Vice Chair Patton and Chairman Floyd. We certainly appreciate the sponsors and their support. I also appreciate our Executive Committee and Policy Board for their leadership and devotion to improving their communities and supporting this organization. The legacy of excellent service and work by the COG is possible due to local government support, steadfast work of our employees, and a history of dependable and wise leadership of our previous executive directors, Doug Taylor and Dee Blackwell. Sadly, Doug Taylor passed away in November. He served as the executive director for 36 years until his retirement in 2008. Doug demonstrated consistency and patience and dedication. He dedicated most of his life to helping improve our local communities, and our region is better because of his efforts. He grew this organization from a handful of employees to the comprehensive organization that continues to prosper today. He led and facilitated so many efforts regarding the development of our regional identity, improvements in transportation, housing, economic development, and so much more. We want to recognize Doug's contributions today and extend our thoughts and support to his wife Terry and his entire family. His family can take great pride in the legacy that Doug left behind. We have a wonderful group of people serving as your COG staff. With this virtual format, I'm unable to recognize them in a customary manner, but I am very thankful for their dedication and excellent work they demonstrate every day, especially during such a challenging year. Each year, we recognize staff that have reached significant milestones in their service at the Council of Governments. We are going to briefly acknowledge staff that reached those milestones since our last annual meeting in 2019. First is Rick Oxford. Rick is celebrating over 35 years of service to our Council of Governments. He's a Lenore native. He lives in Hickory with his daughter, Catherine, and he joined the COG in 1985, and he has administered a number of different programs for housing, rehabilitation, water and sewer, economic development through a variety of federal and state programs. He was instrumental in setting up the Home Consortium for our region, which provides down payment assistance for first-time home buyers. And to date, he has helped nearly 3,000 families become first-time home buyers in our region. He has also helped a number of multifamily affordable housing projects throughout the region as well, and we really appreciate Rick's long and dedicated service to the COG. Next is Lori Powell. She celebrates 30 years of service here at the Council of Governments. She's a graduate of Lenore Ryan College and resides in Hildebrand with her fiancé, Buzz. She joined us in 1990 and works on a variety of community development grants, including urgent repair and single-family rehabilitation, and she has administered over $40 million worth of projects over the years. Thank you, Lori, for your service. Jennifer Cannon also celebrates 20 years this year. She's an LR grad as well. She grew up in Connolly Springs, and her husband live in Conover with their 14-year-old twin boys. She joined us in 2001 in Section 8 housing, and she moved over to community development sometime later and helps Rick keep the consortium flowing smoothly and operating efficiently. And she's part of that effort to help all those home buyers have their first home, nearly 3,000 in total. Also celebrating anniversaries this year are Kim Duncan for 10 years, our Family Self-Sufficiency Coordinator, Wendy Johnson, our Workforce Development Director, Mary Mitchell, Family Caregiver Specialist, and celebrating 5 years this year is Ashley Bullock, Christina Franklin, Teresa Kinney, Kayla Guido, Anita Roberts, Andrea Roper, Aaron Shoddy, Sarah Stamey, and Jason Toney. Congratulations to these staff for reaching significant work anniversaries, and I thank you for your hard work and dedication. I am pleased to introduce our guest speaker today, Doug Griffiths. I first heard Doug speak at a national conference 2 years ago, and it was an engaging and thought-provoking experience. He is the author of the book, 13 Ways to Kill Your Community. This book has great insight about how we unintentionally and sometimes intentionally destroy the opportunities of our communities. Doug served as an elected official for 13 years and helped over 500 communities after retiring from politics in 2015. We are pleased to have him here today to share his wisdom, and he will also lead a longer training session here on June 9th from 1 to 5 p.m. We will send the registration link for that event to everyone on Friday. I'm confident that you will enjoy Doug's insight today. Thank you, Doug, for joining us today, and I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Anthony. I'm glad to be here. I'd be even more excited if I could be there, which I was supposed to be in person, but thanks to this pandemic, couldn't make that happen. But I'm still really excited to be talking to you today. I know we have only half an hour, so I'm going to do a brief introduction of 13 ways. And I know we're going to do a lot more work on June 9th. So let's get started. First, you need to know a little bit about who I am. I'm up here in Alberta, Canada, the most American of all the Canadian provinces. In fact, my grandparents come from Missouri and from North Dakota. So I'm kind of American at heart too. Now, I grew up on a ranch in a small town. So I actually had 200 head of purebred Black Angus cattle. We had hundreds of heads of commercial cattle. We had grain farming. We had horses. And I got a teaching degree so I could make enough money to continue to subsidize my ranching addiction. And I lived in the town in between where I taught and where I ranched. And I suddenly realized one day that all three of those communities that I was participating in were dying. They were shrinking. The businesses were shrinking. People were moving away. And I needed to do something. So I talked to anyone who would listen about the need to do a rural community development strategy. And I shot my mouth off one too many times, which is how I wound up in provincial politics, the equivalent of your state legislature. And I spent 13 years there. Now I got to do a lot of exciting jobs, but the best job I had was writing a rural development strategy for the province of Alberta. It had 72 recommendations that covered health, education, community infrastructure, economic development, youth, seniors, tourism, arts and culture, water, wastewater infrastructure, you name it, it was in the report. And everybody was really happy about it. But as I traveled around working with communities to talk to them about what they needed to do, I discovered that a lot of communities were doing things that were sabotaging their own success. And so I wrote a book, 13 Ways to Kill Your Community, which is really about the attitudes that sabotage our own success. And then after 13 years of working in the legislature, I resigned from politics on purpose and went back to community building, which is where my passion lies. So here we are. Now, I'm not going to go through all 13 of them because we don't have enough time, but I'm going to give you a taster. We're going to go through 4 chapters that I particularly picked out that I think you might find interesting. And we will do a lot more work on them on June 9th. Okay. So the 4 chapters I want to talk about. First is youth. Ignore your youth, or don't engage youth is the name of the chapter. And, you know, I get asked by people in communities all the time the exact same question. They say to me, Doug, what do we have to do to keep young people in this community? And I always anticipate that I'll go to your community and I'll walk around and I'll see young people chained up to mailboxes and chained up to light posts so they can't get out of town, right? We just got to keep them. That's the wrong attitude, and that's the wrong approach. See, the nature of youth is to go off and explore, to go try new things, to meet new people, to learn new ideas, to experiment with stuff. You hope it's not bad stuff, but that's the nature of youth. Your key to success is not to keep them. Your key to success is to let them go, but to give them a reason to want to come back after the adventure is over. But a lot of times we don't do that. I mean, I was working in one particular community and I was doing a presentation over the lunchtime about what to do to redesign your downtown to get ready for the future. And it's proven that presentation is even more so true after this pandemic and coming out of this pandemic. But I was all set to do this presentation and I was wandering around listening to what people were saying while they were having lunch before I did my presentation, and they were all saying the same thing. They were all being very negative. They were talking about how there's no hope and no future in the community. How if you want to be successful, you probably got to go to the city. How new businesses are opening, but more businesses are closing. How the new subdivision doesn't have enough houses in it, and on and on and on they went with the negativity and the despair. This room was full of business owners and elected officials and administration and seniors and young people and a whole diverse group of people. I got up and I did my presentation. And when I was done, I said, any questions? Now, I was never very politically correct, okay, just so you know. But a boisterous guy who was probably the most vocal in the room talking about how there was no hope and no opportunity in the community stood up and said, yeah, Doug, what do we have to do to keep young people in our community? And my response was, shut up. Now, I did say that, but then I explained, all of you are being so negative about your community and young people are hearing that, how can you in one breath say, how do we keep young people in our community? And with every other breath you use, you talk about how there's no hope and no future, and then wonder why young people leave. You've got to stop being so negative. So we don't just oftentimes not give young people a reason to come home. We chase them out of town with those mindsets and those attitudes. And in my own hometown, which I talk about quite a bit. It's an exemplary of what we do in a lot of communities. See, Alberta is a heavy oil and gas province. We have the world's third largest reserves or something like that. And when I grew up, I was told I had three options over and over and over. Option number one, go work in oil and gas if you're a hard worker and want to make money, because you could make $100,000 or $120,000 a year working in oil and gas right out of high school with no need for any more education. Or if you were a little lazier and didn't want to do hard work in the oil patch, you took over the farm, because you're not going to go off to get an education and go to university, and you're not a very hard worker, so you take over the farm. Or option number three was that you go off to university, get educated, and don't come back. In fact, if you went and got an education and came back, you were frowned upon. Like, well, I guess you couldn't make it in the big world, huh? It was ridiculous. No one ever told me when I left, because I didn't want to work in the oil patch like I did to pay for university, and I didn't necessarily want to take over the farm. So I went to university and I couldn't wait to get out of town. And everyone would look at me like, if I'd come back, yeah, you failed. And yet all we wind up doing is, and I'm sorry if you're offended by this, but if you're offended, it's because you recognize there's truth, you just don't want to face it. But we are dumbing down and lazying down our communities and our agriculture by with that attitude that you have to leave if you're smart, and you have to go work in the oil patch if you're a hard worker. It's ridiculous what we're doing to our communities, and then we wonder why young people keep leaving and our future leaves with them. If you want to be successful, what you need are boomerang strategies. And I got this from a young lady. It wasn't my idea. She called it a boomerang strategy. I was in a community and met with the mayor, who had grown his community from just under 5,000 people to just over 10,000 people in the space of about 10 years. It was 11 years. And I asked him what he did, and he had a whole lot of strategies that they utilized. But one that struck me was that he said, in order to grow our community, myself and the president of the Chamber of Commerce get the appropriate permissions, and then we interview all of the grade 12 students every year to find out what they want to be. And if they say they have careers or jobs they're interested in, we put them all together and see if we can attract an industry that will provide those jobs. If we found lots of entrepreneurs that said they wanted to own their own business and they had some great ideas, we created a little micro lending fund through the chamber and a mentorship program for those entrepreneurs. And we married them up to business owners on Main Street, many of whom just thought they were going to lock the door and walk away when they retired because nobody would be interested in the business. And then those that started their own business, we mentored them, because you fail once and sometimes you give up. And it's helpful to have a mentor who's been through those processes, understand what you're going through. And so we had new businesses starting on Main Street. And finally, he said, well, that's how we found our dentist. And I found the young lady that he was referring to. I talked to her and she said, yeah, they interviewed me and they said, what do you want to be when you grow up? And I said, I want to be a dentist. And he said, we need another dentist here. We only have a couple and we could use another one. So would you be willing to go live in our duplex by the university for free if you promise to come back here and work for a few years as a dentist? That was the deal. They had foresight enough to partner with a few other communities to buy a duplex so that they could offer that. And of course, she said, no, thank you. So they went to her parents and said, free accommodations if she comes back here. And they're like, you're damn right you're going to go to university and live there for free. I mean, school's expensive. So she did. She met the love of her life there. They were going to get married. They both graduated. I think he was an accountant. They came back to the community. She worked for the dentist for a while. They got married. They had kids. They were sort of hitched there. So she opened her own practice. And she said it was the perfect boomerang strategy. And you know what a boomerang is, right? You throw it out with enough weight and momentum and you do it right, it goes way out there. And then it comes right back to you with the same force and momentum you cast it out there with. That's what you need to get young people to come back. Your key to success is not to keep them. Your key to success is to give them a reason to come home after they're done exploring. But hey, if you want to kill your community, forget the youth. Don't engage the youth. And they'll leave. and your future will leave with them. The other chapter I wanted to talk about is number 7, cooperation. Don't cooperate. That is the key to failure. Now, I have a presentation that I call I've Seen the Enemy and It's My Mom. And the reason why I call it that presentation by that name is because I was working with a county and a town on a coordinated economic development strategy so they could pool their resources to properly market themselves, to invest in the communities so that they could attract new people. And I said, you guys need to learn to work together, your friends. Well, one gentleman stood up and he said, Doug, you say we're friends. You say that they're not our enemy, but they want our money out in the county so that they can build more swimming pools, so they can put up more light posts and pave their sidewalks and plant more grass and put up more parks. They are not our friends. They are our enemy. And then another gentleman who was in the crowd stood up and said, doesn't your mom live in town? So I called the presentation, I've Seen the Enemy and It's My Mom. And it really does reflect a lot of the challenges that we have. I was in a community in Idaho doing 2 presentations. And after I finished the 13 Ways presentation and a change presentation, the gentleman came up to me, he said, come outside with me. Had a big cowboy hat and stuff. And I thought, oh, I'm in trouble. But I went outside with him and he pointed to the top of a hill. And he said, at the top of that hill, we have 7 different counties coming together. And we have 3 different economic development alliances come together. And I looked at him and he said, we get all the government we pay for. And meaning that they had way too many people competing against each other instead of working together. And that is so critically important. And that is all based on lines in the sand, like the artificially drawn boundaries between our municipalities. And most of those lines in the sand were drawn between 100 and over 150 years ago in our communities, especially in your area. And what was the world like 150 years ago? I mean, our elected officials had to come manage those territories, which is why the lands were drawn the way. And they walked or they rode a horse to come and see you. If you're taking your goods to market, you put it in the wagon and took it to town and then brought supplies home. And you got to do that maybe once a week. We lived in a completely different world. And now we're still fighting over those lines in the sand as though they're meant to separate us, when they were really just management zones to make things equal, to try and make them fair, to try and make it so that we could accommodate the realities of the world. But the realities of the world now have changed dramatically. So, if you want to kill your community, it's best to continue to compete over limited resources so nobody has any ability to do anything right. And my favorite example from that, I was working in a county that had 6 towns in it. And those 7 communities together, those 7 municipal governments had got together and created a fire service agreement so that they could serve their communities and their constituents. Except the fire service agreement had fallen apart 10 years prior to that. And I asked them when I was working on their economic development stuff, why? And they said, well, we started to fight and argue. One said, wait, my constituents paid for that fire hall. No one's telling them what to do with it. Well, my constituents in my area paid for the fire truck and no one's telling them what to do with it. Well, our volunteer firefighters are not being ordered around by any of your people. And they all broke apart into their 7 little municipalities with their own little fire departments. And they said, do you think you could help us fix it? So I looked into it, and you know what I found? That out of 7 municipalities, only 3 of them had people trained and qualified to drive the fire truck. Only 2 of them had people trained and qualified with a certificate to operate the fire trucks, because these are big trucks now with a lot of fancy gauges and high pressure systems. And only 2 of them had people trained to do that. And not one of them had anyone trained or qualified to actually go in and fight a fire or to do a search and rescue. So I got them all together and I said, here's the reality of the situation. You're all fighting over who owns what. The challenge you're going to have is that there's going to be a fire and someone's going to die. And you're all going to go to jail because you're more focused on who owns the assets than providing the services to the citizens you represent. And if you don't believe me, look at Walkerton. And you can identify now Walkerton, 12 people have gone to jail because 12 people have died from Walkerton. And the governor was just charged earlier this year for his role in those decisions. Your job is to serve citizens, not to fight over assets. And you need to work together so you can deliver those services properly. But hey, if you want to kill your community, then don't cooperate. Remain fiercely independent, and then your community can die alone. Next one, chapter 12, complacency. This one, essentially, I talk to people a lot and they always say, oh, Doug, I don't know if we need growth. We just want sustainability. But when I ask them what that means, I realize they don't mean sustainability. They mean status quo. They just don't want anything to change whatsoever. We're working with a community in the United States right now that has that challenge. It's a nice resort community with a small population, but about half the population doesn't want to grow. They don't want more tourists to come. They don't want new families to move in, but they have a challenge because small businesses aren't profitable enough and they keep closing. And then they complain that those small businesses are closing. Their school population's in decline, which means their taxes are going up in order to continue to provide the services. And they're upset about that. And the higher taxes mean fewer people are moving to town. And you see how it gets out of control on you? So I remind everybody, when you think you mean sustainable, check yourself on whether or not you actually mean status quo, because there's no such thing as status quo. It takes hard work to stay the same. If you think you can just freeze everything and not move forward, you're going to find a business closes. And when that business closes, there will be 13 people unemployed in your community. And those 13 unemployed people now have to go somewhere else to find a job, and they take their families with them. That's less kids in your school, less utilization of your healthcare, less volunteers in your community, less people spending money. 13 families not spending money could be just enough to cause another business to close, which is 13 more unemployed people who have to go somewhere else to find a job, and they take their families, which is less kids in your, you see how it starts to spiral down? It takes hard work just to stay where you are, which is why I advise people all the time, instead of using the word sustainable, which is often mistaken for status quo, use words like vibrant, dynamic, aggressive, enterprising, entrepreneurial, anything that says you're going to do something about the community and move forward. Yet a lot of communities think, they even say then, hey, we're okay, we're doing great, we don't have any businesses closed. But that's sort of the tortoise and the hare argument. You know the story about the tortoise and the hare? The tortoise challenged the hare to a race, and the hare thought, oh, I'm easily going to beat you because I'm so fast, I'll be so far ahead. And he got so far ahead and laid down to have a nap. And the tortoise, who was slow and steady and never quit, won. The moment you think you can quit working hard just to hold on to what you have is the moment you're gonna get past, and you will cross the finish line in last place, and your community won't even know what happened. It'll just find out later on that you finished last. And the last one that I want to talk about, which I think is one of the most important. People ask me all the time, Doug, out of 13 ways to kill your community, which one do you think is the biggest challenge that communities face? Now, just for the record, any one of the 13 can kill a community. Most communities aren't doing one, though. They're doing multiple ones. And I tell everyone that, not one of them is more powerful than the other. But secretly, I'm going to tell you that I think 13 is probably one of the biggest challenges that we're facing. Don't take responsibility. Now, just for the record, if you take responsibility for something, you're admitting you have a role in it, and then you need to fix it. You feel compelled to do something about it. So it's easy to kill your community. Just give the responsibility to someone else. But I need to emphasize as well that oftentimes we confuse responsibility with blame. There's a reason why those are two separate words. They mean different things. So I hear people all the time say, "Oh, Doug, I'm not responsible for the price of oil and gas. I'm not responsible for the state of the nation's economy. I'm not responsible for the president's stupid policies that are doing this. I'm not responsible for what's happening in China." Pick whatever you want. You're wrong. What you mean is you're not to blame for those things because you didn't do them. You're still responsible for what you're going to do about them. Imagine it this way. You work for me. I'm your boss, and I'm kind of a jerk. And so one day I show up after you spent years of service working for me, and I just fire you out of the blue for absolutely no reason. You're not to blame for getting fired. I am. You're still responsible for what you're going to do about it. Are you gonna sit down on the sidewalk and cry all day? Are you gonna go file a human rights complaint because you were unjustly fired? Are you gonna go look for another job? Like, you're responsible for how you're gonna react to those things. you can't control most of what happens to you all day except how you respond to it. And so you are responsible for every single one of those things. And so if you're going to kill your community successfully, you've got to make sure that you pass on the responsibility to somebody else. It doesn't matter who it is. I mean, you can say that the responsibility lies with the president, the responsibility lies with the governor, the responsibility lies with the mayor. Although I'm going to tell you right now, oftentimes the mayor's heard this, they push back, go, that's not what he said. He said we're all responsible for this. So go somewhere else where they haven't heard me. Say the responsibility lies with the United Nations. Responsibility lies with ISIS. The responsibility lies with the kids who are playing basketball in the street on a nice day. It doesn't really matter, because ultimately none of them are responsible for the future of your community. Only you are. Now, when I go talk to high school students about their community and their success, I always ask them the same question. I start off by saying, tell me about your community. What's it like? And I guarantee you, it's almost universal that many of the kids say, oh, it's horrible. There's nothing to do here. This is a bad place. There's no fun. There's no hope. There's no opportunity, the whole regular place. So then I ask them, where are you going to go and why? And they'll tell me, you know, I'm going to the city, I'm going to another state, I'm going somewhere for school, for education, for a better quality of life, for more fun, for more activities, whatever it is. And then I say, what's the community going to be like there? And they always say, oh, it's going to be better. And I ask them why. And they usually can't answer. And I remind them that your community is a reflection of who you are. If your community here is horrible, it's because you're not doing something to make it better. If you think you can move to another community and it will be better infinitely, well, you still don't help and still don't take responsibility for it, eventually it will fall apart. The only way to make your community better is for you to do something, because your community is a reflection of who you are. It will always be that. So saying your community is horrible is kind of like chastising yourself when you don't recognize that you're the one that has the power to do it. Or as my dad always used to say, it's a joke that I'm going to pass on to you. A gentleman walks into town and walks down Main Street and goes into a business. He's new to the community and he looks at the business owner and says, what are people like in this town? And the business owner, she looks at him and says, well, what were people like where you came from? And he said, they were all jerks. They were all jerks. And she said, you're going to find we're all jerks here too. But the next day, another guy walking down the same street, walks down into the same business, asks the same lady and says, I'm new to town. What are people like in this community? She says, what were they like where you came from? He said, they were wonderful, kind people. She said, you're going to find we're wonderful, kind people here too. Your community is a reflection of who you are. You are responsible for making it better. So you can blame other people. You can pass on responsibility for the success of your community onto them. And then you can wipe your hands of everything and say, it's not my responsibility. I'm not doing anything to make it worse. But you also won't be doing anything to make it better. If you really want your community to be successful, you've got to recognize that the only one responsible for your community's success is you, because you're the only one that can control whether or not it's going to get better. And now, before I leave you, because I know I only have a minute or two more, we are going to get together on June 9th. We're going to talk about all 13 ways, and we're going to work out strategies that we can implement to get stuff done. But before we meet on June 9th, I have a few things I want you to keep in mind and to consider very carefully. Number one, the world is changing incredibly fast. Technology is changing the economy. The economy is changing the way we shop and the way we live, the way we socialize. Demographics are changing. Our values are changing. Everything in the world is changing. Most of the time, we completely ignore that. We don't pay attention to it, and we still operate in a world that we think exists, even though it doesn't. But the world is changing. And a lot of the systems that we use, a lot of the mindsets that we use, a lot of the tools that we use don't work anymore. For example, I don't know how many of you know what a QWERTY keyboard is. It is the top letters on your keyboard, QWERTY, QWERTY keyboard. Do you know why we use the QWERTY keyboard? We use it because the people who invented the original typewriters needed to slow people down from typing because the hammers would catch and lock up. And it slowed down the typers because then they'd have to take them apart. And so you actually had to be more methodic and slower. And it was designed to make your fingers travel farther so that you didn't lock up those hammers. We still use a QWERTY keyboard, even though we don't need to do that. And actually, a QWERTY keyboard is one of the worst designed keyboards because it was meant to slow you down when you're typing. It creates carpal tunnel syndrome because you have to move around so much when you're typing. A Dvorak keyboard is much more, it's much simpler, it's much more efficient, and you can type much faster with it, except we still use the QWERTY keyboard because that's what we were all trained on. What kind of QWERTY keyboard tools and mindsets and thinking are you using still to operate your community, to think about the future of your community when everything is changed and we don't need to use those systems anymore? I want you to look around and specifically identify how the world is changing. It's technology, the economy, the demographics, the values, all of it. And think about that before we meet on June 9th. The second thing I want you to do is to take an incredibly slow, deep breath. I know I talk really fast. I need to do it once in a while too. But the reason why I want you to do that is because you'll find most of the time, most of your day is spent on the tyranny of the urgent. It's what we think needs to be done. Like we're running on a treadmill and we're just trying to keep up and barely holding on to the rails and to our breath. You got to take a deep breath and slow down, because oftentimes we're running when we don't need to be. We're chasing things that we think are important when it turns out they're not. And if you don't slow down and take that deep breath, reevaluate whether that tyranny that's governing your life is really important, governing your community is really important. If you don't stop and take that breath, you'll just get caught up in it. And then you don't get to change direction, because the faster you're moving, the harder it is to shift. And the world, because it's changing so much, means we need to shift. And the third thing and final thing I want you to do is to start to think about the people of influence in your community, because you're going to need their help. You're going to need to gather them when you're trying to change the future of your community and getting it ready for all these changes that are coming at us right now. Now, the people of influence are different from the people of power. The people of power have titles, right? They're executives, and I'm not going to name them all because they all have positions of power. But we oftentimes think that the best way to get things changed is to gather up the people of power to do things. But those people of power have a title and they're beholden to the organization they represent, which means they're often only focused on what's good for their organization. But building a community is not done when we silo and only focus on what's important to us. It means we need to come together without our titles and think about what's great for everyone and then how we can succeed in that new structure. So it means forgetting the people of power and instead focusing on the people of influence. And you'll be able to find them. You'll be able to identify them, because they're the people that you meet that when they talk, everyone else gets quiet and listens. And those are the people you need to find, because when they start to talk positively, when they start to talk about the ideas, they influence a lot of people and momentum starts to build, change starts to happen, the bandwagon effect takes hold, and then the culture of your community and your organization opens up and is ready for the future. So those three things: recognize how the world is changing fast, look around for some specific examples, take a deep breath and try and abandon some of the tyranny of the urgent just for a little while, and then think about the people of influence. And when we meet on June 9th, we're going to talk seriously about what you can practically do in your community. We're going to talk about the future. We're going to talk about the present, what needs to be done. We're going to talk about what's holding you back. And we're going to talk about how you're going to start the very next day on results. And that's important to note, because I've seen way too many folks like me, consultants, that go in and they come up with big plans. And then a year later, everyone comes back together and they look at each other and go, well, I thought you were doing that. There's no point in having a plan if you're not going to own something and you're not going to decide what you're going to do tomorrow to help make it a reality. And then we can do what is the most important job on earth, and that is make our communities bigger and stronger and better. Because as long as our communities are doing well, our nations will do well, because our leadership will be successful, our businesses will be profitable, and families can take care of themselves and each other. Community building is the single most important job on earth. I hope you've enjoyed the day so far. I really look forward to having you all join on June 9th. And I really look forward to helping you work to make your communities more successful and stronger. And just know, anytime, I'm easy to find. and give me a buzz. And otherwise, I'll see you on June 9th. Thank you, Anthony. I'll send it back to you.
Thank you, Doug. I really appreciate your insight and experience from all the communities you have interacted with over the years. In closing, I would like to thank all of our local elected officials, local government staff, partners, and clients for your support. This has been a challenging and sometimes frustrating year for everyone. Despite those challenges and frustrations, we have cause for much optimism. Our local leaders are making good decisions and wise investments to help our communities prosper. We are grateful to walk alongside each of you to facilitate and support your success. Thank you for your confidence, thank you for your support, and thank you for your collaboration. We don't take that for granted. We look forward to the progress and promise of this year. Thank you for your time and for joining us today.